My name is Elena Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived with the feeling of being unwanted in the very place where I should have belonged. I was born into a family that treated me like a stranger, as though my presence was an accident they were forced to tolerate. To the outside world, we looked like a picture-perfect home. Smiling faces, Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings. But behind those doors, my reality was far different. I wasn't a daughter to my mother. I was an afterthought, a reminder of something she wished had never existed. The cruelest part wasn't just the way she ignored me. It was how deliberate her rejection felt. Like every gesture and every word was carefully designed to carve me out of the family portrait. Family is supposed to be a place of safety, a shelter against the world, but for me, it was the battlefield where I learned my first painful lessons. I still remember the day that truth became impossible to ignore. I was 6 years old, sitting at the dinner table, when my mother looked across at me with eyes that carried no warmth and said the words that would echo in my mind for years. "You're not really part of this family." She said it casually, as if it were a fact everyone already knew. My siblings laughed, the sound sharp and cutting, and I sat frozen, staring at the empty place setting in front of me that didn't even have a spoon. It was as if I were a guest in a home where everyone else belonged. That night, I cried into my pillow until I ran out of tears, and by morning, I promised myself I wouldn't ask her what she meant, because deep down, I already knew. As the years passed, those words became the silent law of our house. I was useful when they needed someone to clean up or when they wanted someone to blame, but when it came to birthdays, family outings, or even just sitting together on the couch, I was invisible. The harder I tried to fit in, the more it felt like I disappeared. There were moments when I thought maybe it was my fault. Maybe if I smiled more, studied harder, kept quieter, they'd finally see me as one of them. But nothing I did mattered. My mother always found a way to remind me that I was on the outside looking in. To her, I wasn't a daughter. I was an inconvenience she tolerated.
I found refuge in small things. I started keeping a diary when I was 8, scribbling down every slight, every insult, every moment that left me gasping for air in a house that didn't feel like home. That diary became my secret companion, the place where I poured all the love I couldn't give and all the pain I couldn't share. At night, I would write until my hands cramped, whispering promises to myself that one day I would leave, and when I did, I would never come back. Sometimes I would imagine what it would feel like to have a family that wanted me, that claimed me, that didn't make me feel like a shadow in my own life. Those dreams were bittersweet, but they kept me alive. By the time I was 10, something inside me hardened. I stopped asking for hugs, stopped trying to sit close on the couch, stopped waiting for an invitation to belong. I realized that their love was a currency I would never be allowed to earn. So instead of begging for scraps, I began preparing for independence. I read stories about people who started over. I hid money in my diary, and I told myself over and over, one day I will walk away. My mother thought she had broken me, but what she didn't see was the fire she had lit inside me. The child she dismissed as not really family was slowly, quietly turning into the adult who would one day hold all the power.
Growing up in that house felt like living in the shadow of everyone else. My name was Elena, but in my family, I was always the extra one. I never forgot the day my mother introduced me to her friends that way. They had come over for tea, laughing and chatting, and when one of them asked about her children, she pointed to my siblings with pride. Then she turned to me and said with a strange smile, "Oh, and this is Elena. She's kind of the extra one." Everyone laughed politely, but my heart sank. I was only 10, yet in that moment, I knew she had no shame in reminding the world that I didn't really belong. At school, things weren't much better. My classmates noticed the way my mother never came to parent-teacher meetings while she always showed up for my siblings. Teachers asked questions I couldn't answer. I would sit in the back of the classroom, pretending I didn't care, but deep inside, it hurt to feel unwanted both at home and at school. On birthdays, the difference was clearer. My siblings had balloons, cakes, and smiling photos with Mom at their side. My birthday passed like any other day, sometimes with a single slice of leftover cake, sometimes with nothing at all. I learned early on that disappointment was safer than hope.
The divide between me and my siblings grew wider every year. They had shiny new clothes, school trips, and encouragement. I had hand-me-downs and silence. When I tried to sit with them in the living room, they would make excuses, shutting doors in my face. Sometimes I heard them laughing at me, calling me the half-sister, even though I was not. It was a cruel nickname they learned from Mom, and it stuck like glue. They acted as though her words gave them permission to treat me as less than family. To survive, I created a secret world of my own. I carried a small notebook everywhere and wrote down my feelings. That diary became my best friend, my secret weapon. I poured into its pages everything I couldn't say out loud. My anger, my sadness, my dreams. I wrote about the family I wished for, the one that would hug me, celebrate me, and tell me I mattered. I wrote promises to myself that one day I would not just escape, I would rise. Writing gave me strength, and even though I was still a child, it made me feel like I had some control over my story. But my mother noticed. One evening, when I had left my diary on the bed, she picked it up and read through the pages. I can still hear her voice mocking my words, calling them nonsense. Then, in front of me, she almost threw the diary into the fire. I remember running forward, snatching it back, my hands shaking. She laughed at my desperation, but inside, I knew something had changed. She could laugh all she wanted, but that diary carried my truth, and I wasn't going to let her burn it away. That was the moment I realized that my words, my thoughts, my very existence were dangerous to her. And if I was dangerous, then maybe I wasn't as powerless as she wanted me to believe.
Every outsider reaches a moment when the pain becomes too heavy to carry. And for me, that moment came one winter night. I was about 15 years old, and my family was gathered around the dining table. The air smelled of roasted chicken, laughter filled the room, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. But then my mother's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. She looked straight at me in front of everyone and said, "You are the biggest disappointment in this family. You'll never be worth anything." My fork froze halfway to my mouth, and the laughter that had filled the room died down into an awkward silence. My siblings lowered their eyes, not because they felt sorry for me, but because they were used to hearing it. It was normal for them, but for me, it was another wound too deep to ignore. Later that night, I passed by the living room and heard my siblings whispering. They didn't know I was standing near the door. Their voices carried like knives. "Mom's right, she doesn't belong with us," one said. Another laughed. "She's like a stray they took in." I wanted to scream, to storm in and tell them I wasn't a stray, but the words stuck in my throat. I pressed my back against the wall and held my breath, my chest burning as I fought not to cry. It wasn't just my mother now. It was the whole family echoing her voice. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept repeating her words, their whispers, over and over. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my diary close to my chest, and for the first time, anger burned hotter than sadness. I realized I couldn't keep begging for love that would never come. I couldn't keep trying to fit into a picture where my place was always erased. The breaking point came when I decided to confront her. The next morning, I found my mother in the kitchen. She was making tea, humming softly, as though she hadn't destroyed me the night before. My hands were shaking, but I forced the words out. Why do you hate me so much? Why do you keep saying I'm not part of this family? For a moment, she paused. Then she looked at me with cold eyes and said, Because you're nothing, Alina. You'll never be more than nothing. Something inside me cracked open. Her words no longer broke me, they lit a fire. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just stared back at her, my silence heavier than any argument. In that silence, I made a promise to myself. One day, I would never need her again. One day, I would prove that I was more than nothing. That winter night became the turning point of my life. I was still a teenager, but I knew the path I had to take. I would stop chasing her approval, stop trying to earn a place in a family that never wanted me. From that day on, I would start building a life where her words no longer had power.
The day I finally walked away from my family is carved into my memory like a scar. I was 17, old enough to understand the weight of my decision, but young enough to feel the fear of stepping into the unknown. That morning began like any other. My mother's voice filled the house, giving orders, criticizing me for being too slow, too clumsy, too useless. But something inside me had shifted since that winter night. I no longer cried when she insulted me. Instead, I felt a calm determination. I had saved a little money from part-time jobs I secretly worked at after school, cleaning tables in a cafe, stacking shelves in a small store. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me the courage to leave. When I packed my small bag, I didn't take much, just a few clothes, a notebook, and a pen. That notebook had become my best friend, the only place where I could pour my thoughts without fear of judgment. As I zipped the bag shut, my hands trembled, not from regret, but from a strange mix of fear and excitement. I kept telling myself, if I stay, nothing will ever change. If I leave, at least I have a chance. Walking through the hallway felt like moving through a battlefield. Every step echoed loudly in my ears. My siblings were in the living room, playing on their phones, pretending I didn't exist. My father was reading the newspaper, ignoring me as always. And then there was my mother, standing near the door with her arms crossed, as if she had been waiting. She looked at the bag in my hand and smirked. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked.
My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "I'm leaving." She laughed, a cold, mocking laugh that cut through me. "Leave? You'll come back crawling. You can't survive without us. You're nothing out there." Those words could have broken me once, but now they gave me strength. I lifted my chin and said softly, "Watch me." The moment I stepped outside and the door closed behind me, I felt the air hit my face like freedom. For the first time in my life, the world seemed wide and terrifying, but it was mine. I walked down the street with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. I didn't know where I would sleep that night. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never beg to be loved again. That night, I found shelter in a small hostel for girls who had nowhere else to go. It wasn't much, just a narrow bed and a thin blanket, but it felt like paradise compared to the coldness of my family's house. Lying there in the dark, I whispered to myself, "This is the beginning. One day, I'll build a life so strong they will regret every word they ever said." Walking away was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the first step toward becoming who I was meant to be.
Leaving home was only the first battle. The real challenge began when I had to survive on my own. I was just 17 with no family to lean on, no real guidance, and very little money in my pocket. At first, everything felt frightening. The hostel I stayed in was safe enough, but it was temporary. The other girls there each had their own stories, some even worse than mine, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had been pushed away. That gave me strength, but it also reminded me that I couldn't stay there forever. I had to find a way to stand on my own 2 feet. My first job was in a small cafe. The hours were long and the pay was low, but I was grateful for it. I cleaned tables, washed dishes, and sometimes served coffee with a forced smile, even when my feet ached. Every coin I earned felt like a victory. I began saving little by little, hiding the money in an envelope under my mattress. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and no one could take it away from me. For the first time, I felt the quiet pride of building something with my own hands. Still, it wasn't easy. There were nights I went to bed hungry because I wanted to save more money. There were days I felt like giving up, especially when customers shouted at me or when my boss criticized me for being too slow. Those voices reminded me of my mother, and sometimes I almost believed them. But then I remembered why I had left. I wasn't going to let anyone decide my worth again. So I pushed through the exhaustion, through the doubt, and kept going. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I sat in the cafe after closing. My boss, an older woman named Mrs. Harris, noticed I was still there. She wasn't always kind, but that night, she surprised me. She asked why I was working so hard, and, without meaning to, I told her a little about my past. She didn't judge me. Instead, she nodded and said, "If you keep this determination, you'll go far." Those words stayed with me. For once, someone believed I could be more than useless. Slowly, I began taking small steps toward independence. I rented a tiny room in the city, not much bigger than a closet, but it was mine. The first night I slept there, I felt a strange mix of loneliness and pride. I had no family photos on the wall, no one waiting for me at the door, but I also had no insults, no cold stares, no weight of rejection. It was freedom, raw and uncertain, but real. Looking back, those first steps were messy and painful, but they built the foundation of the life I was determined to create. I didn't have much yet, but I had something far more powerful than money or comfort. I had the will to keep moving forward. And I knew, deep inside, this was only the beginning of my rise.
Success doesn't always arrive like a thunderstorm. It often begins as a small drop of rain. For me, my first taste of success came slowly, almost quietly, but it was powerful enough to change the course of my life. By the time I turned 18, I was still working at the cafe, saving every coin I could, but I started dreaming bigger. I didn't just want to survive anymore. I wanted to build something of my own. I wanted to prove to the world and to myself that I could rise far above the useless girl my mother always claimed I was. One day, while cleaning a table, I overheard 2 customers talking about a local business seminar. They mentioned free workshops where young people could learn basic skills about starting a business, budgeting, and leadership. My heart raced as I wiped down the table. I had never thought of myself as someone who could join such events, but something inside me whispered, why not? I showed up to the seminar wearing my one neat outfit, nervous and shy, but determined. The room was filled with strangers who looked more confident than me, but I sat in the back and listened carefully to every word. For the first time, I was learning about possibilities I had never imagined. I filled pages of my notebook with ideas, scribbling plans late into the night when I returned to my small, rented room. I didn't have money or connections, but I had ambition, and that was enough to light a fire. With time, I began applying those lessons in small ways. I started helping the cafe owner organize her stockroom and keep track of daily expenses. At first, she didn't notice, but eventually she realized how much smoother things ran. One evening, she pulled me aside and said, "You have a head for business. Don't waste it."
Those words gave me confidence I had never known before. For once, someone wasn't just pointing out my mistakes, they were recognizing my potential. Encouraged, I saved enough to enroll in a short business course at a community college. It wasn't fancy, but it gave me the tools I needed. I learned about accounting, customer service, and most importantly, leadership. I discovered that my struggles had given me something valuable: resilience. Where others complained about small setbacks, I kept going because I had already lived through worse. The turning point came when Mrs. Harris, the cafe owner, let me take charge one busy weekend. I managed the staff, handled the customers, and even solved a supply problem when we ran out of ingredients. At the end of the night, exhausted but proud, I realized I had done it. I had stepped into a position of responsibility and I hadn't failed. That night, lying in my tiny room, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." It wasn't wealth or fame yet, but it was the spark of success. For the first time, I could see a path opening before me, one that led far away from the girl my mother tried to break, and toward the woman I was becoming.
After that first taste of success, I knew I could no longer live only for survival. I wanted to create something of my own, something that would give me independence and prove once and for all that I was not the useless girl my mother had named me. The idea of building my own path scared me, but it also gave me a sense of hope I had never felt before. At the cafe, I continued to learn every day. I watched how customers behaved, what made them happy, and what frustrated them. I noticed how the flow of business depended on organization and smart decisions. I began to think, what if I had my own place one day? At first, it seemed like an impossible dream, but the more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I started small. I used my savings to buy a second-hand laptop. It was slow and old, but it opened doors for me. Late at night, after my shifts, I would sit in my little rented room and search the internet for business tips, free courses, and motivational stories. I taught myself how to design posters, how to budget, and even how to manage social media. Every skill I learned felt like another brick laid on the road to my future. Of course, there were many struggles. Sometimes I felt overwhelmed and doubted myself. I remembered my mother's voice in my head, saying, "You'll never be anything." Those words haunted me, especially when things didn't go as planned. But each time, I fought back by working harder. I reminded myself of the promise I had made when I walked away. I would never let her be right about me. Soon, I began freelancing, helping small shop owners in my neighborhood with advertising, simple accounting, and managing their social pages. It didn't pay much, but it gave me experience and built my confidence. People began to notice my dedication. Some even recommended me to others. Slowly, step by step, I was carving out my own path. The turning point came when I helped a small bakery improve their business. I created a simple flyer, managed their promotions, and gave them ideas for customer service. Within weeks, their sales increased. The owner, grateful and impressed, paid me more than I had ever earned in one go. That moment was unforgettable, not just because of the money, but because I realized my ideas had value. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. From then on, my vision became clear. I wanted to start my own company someday. It sounded like a mountain too high to climb, but I knew I had already walked through fire. With hard work, patience, and determination, I could do it. I didn't tell anyone, not my old coworkers, not even Mrs. Harris. It was my secret dream, the fire that kept me alive. Every night, as I closed my notebook full of plans, I whispered to myself, "This is my path, and one day they will see what I've become." The day I held my first company badge in my hands, I felt a rush of emotions I could hardly describe. It wasn't just a piece of plastic with my photo on it. It was proof that I had built something from nothing. Proof that I was not useless, but capable, determined, and unstoppable. I had officially registered my small company, and though it was just the beginning, that badge felt heavier than gold. It hadn't been easy getting there. For months, I worked day and night, taking freelance projects, saving every dollar, and networking with anyone who would listen to my ideas. I remember walking into the government office to file my paperwork, my hands shaking as I signed my name. I had never signed anything so important before. For years, my signature meant nothing to my mother. But now, with one pen stroke, it became the symbol of my independence. The first time I wore the badge around my neck, I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the girl staring back. She looked stronger, braver, and ready for the world. A quiet smile spread across my face as I whispered, "This is who I am now." But with the pride came something else, something darker. My mother's voice still echoed in my head. "You'll never be part of this family. You'll never be anything." Every insult, every rejection, every cold stare, they hadn't broken me, they had built me. And now, with my company badge hanging from my neck, I realized I was closer than ever to proving her wrong.
At first, my company was just me, a laptop, and endless determination. I helped small businesses grow, I took every opportunity I could find, and slowly, clients began to trust me. With each project completed, my confidence grew. I was no longer the girl who sat crying in her bedroom, wishing for love. I was a young woman building her own empire. Still, late at night, when the city grew quiet and the only sound was my pen scratching against paper, I would pause and think about her, my mother. Did she even wonder where I was? Did she ever regret pushing me away? The thought used to make me ache, but now it only fueled me. Because deep down, I knew the day would come when she would need me. And when that day arrived, I wouldn't be the weak girl she remembered. I would be the woman with the power she never thought I'd have. Holding that badge, I made myself another promise. The next time she hears my name, it won't be as her useless daughter. It will be as the founder, the boss, the woman she can't ignore. And with that promise, the stage was set. My rise had begun, and so had the path to revenge.
I always knew, deep inside, that one day my mother would come back into my life. What I never expected was the reason. It wasn't love, it wasn't regret, and it certainly wasn't an apology. Nope, she came back because she needed something from me. And the irony of it all still makes me smile. She needed my signature. It was a late afternoon when the knock came at my office door. By then, my company had grown into a small but respected firm. My office wasn't huge, but it had glass walls, polished floors, and my name proudly written on the door. Alina Carter, founder and CEO. That alone was a victory. When my assistant walked in and said, "There's a woman asking for you. She says she's your mother," my heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. After all the years of silence, after all the rejection, she was suddenly here. When she entered, I barely recognized her. Time had not been kind. Her proud posture was gone. Her face carried lines of stress, and her eyes, those same cold eyes that once looked at me with contempt, now looked desperate. She didn't greet me as a daughter. She greeted me as a businesswoman. She explained quickly. There was property, inheritance, and legal matters that needed my signature. Without me, nothing could move forward.
As she spoke, I sat silently, letting her words sink in. All I could hear was the echo of the past, her voice calling me useless, her laughter when I cried, her cold smirk as I left with my small bag. And now, here she was, needing the very thing she once said had no value: my name, my mark, my identity. I leaned back in my chair, my badge shining against my chest, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She knew I had power now. She knew the decision rested in my hands. For years, she had denied me a place in the family, but suddenly, I was the key she couldn't ignore. Inside, a storm raged. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to throw every insult back in her face. Another part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. But what I did instead was more powerful. I kept my voice calm, my tone steady as I asked, "And why should I help you, Mother? After all, I wasn't really family, remember?" Her face turned pale. For the first time, I saw guilt flash across her expression. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. In that silence, I felt something break free inside me. I was no longer her victim. I was the one in control. That day, I realized revenge doesn't always come with shouting or anger. Sometimes it comes in silence, in power, in making the person who hurt you stand in front of you and beg for what they once denied. And that was only the beginning.
The moment I held the papers in my hands felt heavy, like a weight of years pressing down on my fingertips. My mother stood across from me, her face pale and tired, and behind her I saw the old faces of my family, their eyes full of hope and fear. They wanted me to fix everything with a single stroke of my pen. For years, they had closed doors on me, but now one simple signature could open those doors again. I looked at the contract, at the boxes waiting for my initials, and I felt the full measure of what had brought us here. All the late nights I cried, the promises I made to myself, the small victories that built into a life she could not ignore. I thought about the child who packed a small bag and left, and I thought about the woman who had earned a badge and a name. My mother spoke softly, asking for mercy, for help, for a last chance. Her voice trembled in a way it never had when she threw insults. Part of me, the part that remembered her small kindnesses, rare as they were, wanted to reach out, to heal. But another part remembered the cold dinners, the mocking laughter, the diary she almost burned. I felt anger rise like a tide, but I also felt something else. Clarity. I understood in that moment that this choice was not only about revenge, it was about the life I wanted to lead from now on. If I signed, I would step back into the role she assigned me for years. If I refused, she would face the consequences she had once hoped I would never survive. I asked for time. I closed my eyes and let memories pass through. My mother's words, my siblings' whispers, the nights I held my notebook so tight it hurt. I remembered every small victory that led me here. I saw the cafe owner who first told me I had a head for business, Mrs. Harris, who had given me a chance, the clients who trusted me with their lives. I listened to my own heartbeat, steady and real. When I opened my eyes, I felt no rush to punish and no rush to forgive. I felt a responsibility to my own future. So I made a choice that would not be cruel, but would be true to who I had become. I told her I would help, but only on my terms. I would sign some papers, but not all. I would require transparency, accountability, and real change. If they wanted my name on their documents, they would have to accept the cost. Honesty, real work, and respect. No more empty apologies or secret slips. They had to show they had learned something. My mother's lips trembled when I spoke. For the first time, she asked me how much I wanted, not in money, but in dignity. I asked for meetings, for a public acknowledgement of what happened, for small acts that proved remorse. She agreed, trembling, and in that bargain, I felt something like justice. Not revenge that destroys, but power that rebuilds boundaries. I signed the pages I felt right about, and I refused the ones that handed them all control. As I put down my pen, the room felt different, quieter, clearer. I left the office with my head high, not because I had beaten them, but because I had chosen myself. The final lesson I learned that day was simple. True victory was not about making them fall. It was about standing tall enough that their absence no longer defined me.